I stood at the bus stop, the freezing rain pelting my face like tiny needles, each drop a reminder of the betrayal that had brought me here. My coat, once a proud purchase from a thrift store's better days, clung to my shivering frame, soaked through. I was 68 years old, and my son, Michael, the boy I'd raised with every ounce of my heart, had left me here. Not just him, his wife, Laura, and their 2 teenage kids, Emma and Jake. They'd driven off in their shiny SUV, the taillights fading into the storm, leaving me to fend for myself in this godforsaken downpour. I could still hear Laura's sharp voice from earlier that day, her words slicing through me. "You're too old to be part of this family anymore. Evelyn, you're a burden. A burden. After all I'd done for them. After the years of sacrifice. The late nights working double shifts at the diner to keep Michael fed and clothed. The college fund I'd scraped together by selling my mother's jewelry. I gave them everything. And this was my reward, a cold, lonely bus stop in the middle of nowhere. I clutched my phone, the screen glowing faintly through the rain. My fingers, stiff from the cold, hovered over the banking app. I'd always been the one to manage their finances. Michael was terrible with money. Always had been. And when he married Laura, she was no better. So, I'd taken charge, setting up their accounts, paying their bills, even bailing them out when they overspent. The account was still in my name, a joint one I'd never removed myself from. A small oversight on their part, a fatal mistake. My thumb pressed the screen, and with a few taps, I froze it. Every cent. Their mortgage, their car payments, their credit cards gone. I didn't feel guilt. Not yet. What I felt was fire. A burning need for justice that warmed me against the rain. They'd left me here to suffer. Now they'd feel the chill of their own choices. The bus was late. Or maybe it wasn't coming at all. I didn't care. My mind was racing, replaying the events that led to this moment. It started 6 months ago, when Laura began dropping hints that I was in the way. At first, it was subtle comments about how their house was too small, how the kids needed more space. Then it became overt. She'd roll her eyes when I offered to cook dinner, snap at me when I tried to help with the kids' homework. Michael, my own flesh and blood, didn't defend me. He'd just sit there, eyes on his phone, letting her words cut deeper each time. I'd moved in with them after my apartment building was sold to developers, thinking it would be temporary, thinking family took care of family. I was wrong. Tonight had been the breaking point. We'd been at a family dinner at their house, a tense affair with undercooked chicken and forced small talk. I tried to lighten the mood, telling a story about Michael as a boy, how he'd once tried to fix my old radio and ended up gluing his fingers together. The kids laughed, but Laura's face tightened. "Evelyn, maybe it's time you found your own place," she said, her voice cold as the rain now soaking me. Michael didn't look up from his plate. Emma and Jake shifted uncomfortably, but they didn't speak. Then Laura announced they were going to a movie, a family outing, and there wasn't room in the car for me. "The bus stop's just down the road," she'd said, tossing me my coat. Michael drove me there, silent the whole way, and when I got out, he didn't even look at me. The SUV sped off, and I was alone. I wasn't always this person, someone who'd freeze her own son's bank account in a fit of rage. I'd been a mother who loved fiercely, who'd do anything for her child. But love, I was learning, could curdle into something else when it was taken for granted. As the rain dripped down my neck, I thought about the years I'd spent building Michael up, teaching him right from wrong, only for him to discard me like an old piece of furniture. The phone in my hand felt like a weapon, and for the first time in my life, I wielded it without hesitation. The headlights of a bus finally appeared in the distance, cutting through the storm. I didn't know where it was going, and I didn't care. I'd figure it out. I always had. As I stepped onto the bus, the driver gave me a pitying look, but I held my head high. I wasn't broken. Not yet. I was Evelyn Marie Thompson, and I'd survived worse than this. The bus lurched forward, and I settled into a seat. My phone still clutched tightly. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing: they'd regret leaving me in the rain. The bus rumbled through the night, its heater barely working, but it was better than the freezing rain. I stared out the window, the world a blur of wet lights and shadows. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I ignored it. It was probably Michael or Laura, already noticing the frozen account. Let them panic. Let them feel the helplessness I'd felt standing at that bus stop, abandoned by the family I'd poured my life into. I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. I needed time to think, to decide what came next. The fire of my anger still burned, but beneath it, something else stirred grief. Maybe. Or the ache of a mother who still loved her son, despite everything. I thought about the early days, when it was just me and Michael. His father left when he was 3, a deadbeat who didn't even bother with a goodbye note. I raised Michael alone, working long hours at the diner, coming home with sore feet and a smile I faked for his sake. He was a good kid back then, full of questions, always tagging along behind me, his little hand in mine. I'd tell him stories at bedtime, made up tales about knights and dragons, and he'd beg for one more chapter. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now, someone who hadn't been left in the rain by the boy she'd raised. The bus stopped at a small station in a town I didn't recognize. I got off, my legs stiff, and found a 24-hour diner across the street. It was the kind of place I'd worked in for years: greasy countertops, flickering fluorescent lights, and a jukebox that probably hadn't been updated since the 80s. I ordered a coffee, black, and sat in a corner booth, my wet coat dripping onto the cracked vinyl. The waitress, a young woman with tired eyes, didn't ask questions. She just filled my cup and moved on. I envied her detachment. My phone buzzed again, and this time I looked. 5 missed calls from Michael, 3 from Laura, and a text from Emma. "Grandma, where are you? Are you okay?" My heart softened at her words, but only for a moment. Emma was a sweet girl, but she hadn't stood up for me either. I sipped the coffee, bitter and too hot, and let my mind wander back to the months leading up to tonight. Laura's hostility hadn't come out of nowhere. It started when I moved in, when their perfect little family unit began to feel my presence. I tried to help cooking meals, folding laundry, driving the kids to soccer practice, but every gesture was met with resistance. Laura would redo the dishes I'd washed, claiming I hadn't gotten them clean enough. She'd criticize my cooking, saying it was too old-fashioned for the kids. Michael, who'd once called me his hero, just let it happen. I'd catch him glancing at me sometimes, guilt in his eyes, but he never spoke up. I wondered if he was afraid of her, or if he'd simply stopped caring. The diner's door chimed, and a man in a trucker hat walked in, shaking rain from his jacket. He reminded me of my brother, Tom, who'd been a long-haul driver before he passed a few years back. Tom had always been my rock, the one who'd tell me I was too hard on myself, that I deserved better than the life I'd been dealt. He'd have been furious if he knew what Michael had done. I could almost hear his voice now, rough and warm. "Ev, you don't owe them nothing. You gave them everything already." I wished he were here, sitting across from me, telling me what to do next. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was a voicemail from Michael. His voice was frantic, pleading. "Mom, what did you do? The bank account's frozen. We can't pay for anything. Please, call me back. I deleted it without listening to the rest. Let him sweat. Let him feel what it's like to be powerless. To be at the mercy of someone else's choices. I wasn't sure how long I'd keep the account frozen, maybe a day. Maybe a week. It wasn't about the money. It was about making them understand. I'd spent my life giving. And they'd taken it all for granted. Now they'd see what it felt like to lose something they relied on. The coffee was cold now. But I didn't care. I was starting to feel something else. Something beyond the anger and the hurt. It was clarity. Sharp and cold as the rain outside. I'd been a doormat for too long. Letting Michael and Laura walk all over me because I thought that's what mothers did. But I wasn't just a mother. I was Evelyn. A woman who'd survived a deadbeat husband. A grueling job. And a lifetime of scraping by. I'd find a way through this. Too. The diner's warmth seeped into my bones. And for the first time that night, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was a beginning. The diner's clock read 2 a.m. And the world outside was still cloaked in rain. I'd been sitting in that booth for hours, nursing my cold coffee, my mind a tangle of memories and rage. My phone had stopped buzzing, the silence almost louder than the calls had been. Michael and Laura must have given up. Or maybe they were plotting their next move. I didn't care. For the first time in years, I was thinking about myself, what I wanted, what I deserved. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. I'd spent so long putting my family first that I'd forgotten how to be anything else. But tonight, standing in that freezing rain, I'd remembered. I was more than their mother, their grandmother, their bank. I was Evelyn, and I wasn't done yet. I thought about the house I'd raised Michael in. A cramped little place with peeling paint and a leaky roof. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Filled with laughter and love despite the hardships. I'd worked double shifts to keep it. To give Michael a stable home. When he got married, I was so proud. Thinking he'd build a life like that. Too. Laura seemed perfect at first, smart. Charming. Ambitious. But over time, I saw the cracks. She was controlling. Always needing to be the center of everything. Michael changed around her. Becoming quieter. Less like the boy who'd glued his fingers together trying to fix my radio. I should have seen it coming. Should have known she'd turn him against me. The waitress refilled my coffee without asking. And I gave her a small smile. She reminded me of myself at her age, worn out, but still moving. Still surviving. I wondered what her story was. What kept her here in this lonely diner at this hour? I wanted to ask, but I didn't. My own story was heavy enough. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app again, staring at the frozen account. It felt good. That power. But it also felt hollow. Freezing their money wouldn't undo what they'd done. It wouldn't bring back the son who'd once looked at me like I was his whole world. I scrolled through my contacts, hesitating over Emma's name. She was only 16, caught in the middle of her parents' mess. Her text had been the only one that showed any concern, and I wondered if she felt guilty for not speaking up. I typed a quick reply. I'm okay. Sweetheart. Don't worry. I hit send before I could overthink it. I didn't want her to feel caught in the crossfire, but I also wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. The hurt was too raw. The betrayal too fresh. I thought about what justice meant. Was it this freezing their account? Making them feel the sting of their own actions? Or was it something bigger? Something that would force them to see me. Really see me. For the first time in years. I didn't have the answer. But I knew I couldn't go back to being the Evelyn who let them walk all over her. I'd spent too many years swallowing my pride. Biting my tongue. Thinking it was for the good of the family. But family wasn't supposed to leave you in the rain. Family was supposed to stand by you. No matter what. The diner's door chimed again, and an older man walked in, his face weathered like he'd spent his life outdoors. He sat at the counter, ordered pie, and started chatting with the waitress. Their easy banter made me ache for something I couldn't name. Maybe it was connection, or maybe it was just the simplicity of being seen. I'd felt invisible for so long. First in Michael's house, then at that bus stop. Freezing their account had been my way of screaming, "I'm still here." But now, in the quiet of this diner, I wondered if there was a better way to make them hear me. I paid for my coffee and stepped back into the rain. Lighter now, but still cold. The bus station was empty. The next bus not due for hours. I found a bench under an awning and sat, pulling my coat tighter. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was a text from Michael. "Mom, I'm sorry. Please, we need to talk. Sorry." The word felt cheap after what they'd done. I didn't respond, but I didn't delete it either. I let it sit there, a small crack in the wall of my anger. Maybe there was a way forward, a way to rebuild what had been broken. But it wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be on their terms. I'd make sure of that. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time I boarded another bus. This one headed toward the city where I'd lived before moving in with Michael. It was a place I hadn't seen in years. A place where I'd built a life before everything unraveled. The seats were hard, the air stale, but I felt a strange sense of purpose. I wasn't running away. I was running toward something, though I didn't know what yet. My phone stayed silent now, and I was glad for it. I needed space to think, to untangle the mess of emotions that had been building since that moment at the bus stop. Anger, yes, but also sorrow. And beneath it all, a stubborn hope that I could reclaim some part of myself. I thought about Laura's words again, the way she'd called me a burden. They stung because I'd always prided myself on being the opposite, someone who carried the load, who made things work. When Michael was a boy, I'd been the one to fix everything: broken toys, scraped knees, his broken heart when his first girlfriend dumped him. Even after he married Laura, I was the one they called when the bills piled up or the car broke down. I'd never asked for thanks, but I'd expected respect. Instead, I got a cold shoulder and a bus stop in the rain. The city lights appeared on the horizon, a faint glow against the dark. I didn't have a plan. Not really. But I knew I couldn't go back to Michael's house. Not after what they'd done. I'd find a cheap motel. Maybe. Or crash with an old friend if any were still around. My savings weren't much, but they'd get me through until I figured things out. The frozen account wasn't about money for me. It was about power. About showing them I wasn't invisible. But now, sitting on this bus, I wondered if I'd gone too far. Would Michael ever forgive me? Did I want him to? I closed my eyes, letting the hum of the bus lull me into memory. I saw Michael at 10. His face lit up on Christmas morning when I gave him the bike I'd saved for months to buy. I saw him at 16, nervous in his prom tux, asking me to tie his tie because he couldn't get it right. I saw him at his wedding, his smile so wide I thought my heart would burst. Where had that boy gone? Had Laura changed him? Or had he changed himself? I wanted to believe there was still some part of him that loved me, that remembered who we'd been to each other. The bus pulled into the city station, and I stepped off. The air cold, but no longer wet. The streets were familiar, even after all these years, and I found myself walking toward my old neighborhood. The diner where I'd worked was still there, though it had a new sign and brighter lights. I didn't go in. Instead, I kept walking until I reached the park where I used to take Michael to play. It was empty now, the swings swaying slightly in the breeze. I sat on a bench, my breath visible in the cold air, and let myself feel the weight of everything. My phone buzzed, and I saw another text from Emma. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I should have said something. Please come back. My heart ached at her words. She was just a kid, caught in her parents' mess. I typed a reply. I love you, Emma. I need some time. I hit send and felt a small relief, like I'd opened a window in a stuffy room. Maybe Emma was my way back to them, a bridge I could cross when I was ready. But I wasn't ready yet. I needed to find myself first, the Evelyn who'd been buried under years of giving. I stood, my legs steadier now, and started walking toward a motel I remembered from years ago. It was still there, a little shabbier but open. I checked in, the clerk barely looking at me as he handed me a key. The room was small, the bed creaky, but it was mine. For the first time in months, I had a space that wasn't Michael's or Laura's. I lay down, staring at the ceiling, and let myself imagine a future where I wasn't defined by what I'd lost. Maybe I'd get a job, or volunteer somewhere, or even write the stories I used to tell Michael. Whatever it was, it would be mine. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener. But it was a refuge, a place where I could breathe without Laura's judgment or Michael's silence. I woke to the sound of traffic outside, the city waking up around me. My phone had a new message, this time from Jake. Grandma, I'm sorry. We messed up. Please call Dad. I stared at the words, my heart caught between warmth and wariness. Jake was only 14, too young to fully understand the weight of what had happened. But his apology felt genuine. I didn't reply. Not yet. I needed to hold on to my resolve, to keep the fire that had driven me to freeze their account burning a little longer. I showered, the hot water a small luxury, and dressed in the same damp clothes from the night before. I'd need to buy something clean, but that could wait. For now, I wanted to walk, to feel the city under my feet, to remind myself I was still here, still alive. I left the motel and headed toward the diner, the one where I'd worked for nearly 20 years. It was busier now, filled with morning regulars, construction workers, cabbies, a few students hunched over laptops. I slid into a booth and ordered pancakes, something I hadn't eaten in years. The sweetness was comforting, a small rebellion against the bitterness in my heart. As I ate, I thought about justice again. Freezing their account had been impulsive, a gut reaction to the pain they'd caused. But what did I want from it? Did I want them to beg, to grovel, to promise they'd never hurt me again? Or did I want something deeper, something that would heal the rift between us? I didn't have answers, but I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. I'd have to face them eventually, to decide whether to thaw the account or let it stay frozen. A permanent reminder of their betrayal. A woman sat down at the counter, her gray hair pulled into a neat bun. She looked about my age, maybe a little older, and there was something familiar about her. It took me a moment to realize it was Carol, a friend from my diner days. We'd worked the same shifts, shared stories about our kids, laughed over bad tippers. I hadn't seen her since I moved in with Michael. I called her name, and she turned, her face lighting up. Evelyn. My God, it's been forever. We hugged, and for a moment, I felt like my old self again. Carol joined me in the booth, and we talked like no time had passed. I told her everything, Michael, Laura, the bus stop, the frozen account. She listened, her eyes narrowing at the parts that hurt most. You did the right thing, she said when I finished. They need to learn they can't treat you like that. Her words were validating, but they also made me question myself. Was I right? Or was I just angry? Carol sensed my hesitation and reached for my hand. You're not the villain here, Ev. You're standing up for yourself. That's something to be proud of. We spent the morning catching up, and Carol offered me her spare room until I got back on my feet. I hesitated, not wanting to be a burden again. But she insisted. "Your family," she said, and the word hit me hard. Family. The thing I'd fought for. The thing that had broken me. I accepted her offer, grateful for a friend who saw me when my own son couldn't. Back at Carol's apartment, I settled into the small guest room, my few belongings still in a bag from the motel. I checked my phone again, more missed calls from Michael. Another text from Emma. "Grandma, I miss you. Please don't hate us." I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it down. I wasn't ready to let go of my anger. Not when it was the only thing keeping me upright. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and thought about redemption. Could I find it? Could they? I didn't know. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had a choice. Carol's apartment was small but warm, filled with plants and old photos that made it feel like a home. I spent the next few days settling in, helping her cook, watering her plants, trying to find a rhythm that didn't revolve around Michael's family. It was strange, being in a space where I wasn't constantly apologizing for existing. Carol didn't treat me like a burden. She treated me like a friend, someone with stories worth hearing. We'd sit on her tiny balcony at night, sipping tea, talking about the past and avoiding the future. I wasn't ready to think about what came next, not when the wound was still so fresh. My phone kept buzzing, a steady stream of texts and calls from Michael, Laura, and the kids. I read them but didn't respond. Michael's messages were a mix of apologies and frustration. "Mom, I'm sorry, but this isn't fair. We need that money." Laura's were colder, more accusing. "Evelyn, this is ridiculous. You're hurting the kids." The kids' messages were the hardest to ignore. Emma wrote long paragraphs, begging me to come back, saying she hadn't meant to hurt me. Jake's were shorter, but they carried the same guilt. I should have said something. "Grandma, I'm sorry." I wanted to believe them, but I couldn't shake the image of that SUV driving away, leaving me in the rain. Carol noticed my distraction and pushed me to talk. "You can't keep running from this, Ev," she said one evening, her voice gentle but firm. "You froze their account to make a point. But what's the endgame? You want to punish them forever, or you want to fix this?" I didn't have an answer. Punishing them felt good, but it wasn't healing me. Fixing it felt impossible, not when I could still feel Laura's words cutting into me. Michael's silence deafening. Carol suggested I write them a letter, get my thoughts out without the pressure of a confrontation. I resisted at first, but the idea grew on me. I sat at Carol's kitchen table with a notepad, the pen heavy in my hand. I started writing, not sure where it would lead. "Michael," I began, "you were my whole world. I gave you everything, me time, my love, my dreams. And you left me in the rain." The words poured out, raw and unfiltered. I wrote about the sacrifices I'd made, the pain of being called a burden, the betrayal of his silence. I wrote about Laura, how her cruelty had chipped away at me, and about the kids, how I loved them but couldn't trust them yet. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the pages were filled with everything I'd held back for years. When I finished, I felt lighter, like I'd shed a weight I hadn't known I was carrying. I didn't send the letter. Not yet. I needed time to sit with it, to decide if it was a bridge or a wall. Carol read it and nodded, her eyes soft. "That's you, Ev. That's the woman I've always known, strong, honest, human." Her words gave me courage, a reminder that I wasn't just a mother who'd been betrayed. I was a person with a voice, and I was starting to use it. I spent the next day walking the city, visiting old haunts, reconnecting with the Evelyn I'd been before Michael's family took over my life. I stopped by the library where I used to take Michael to story time, the park where we'd flown kites. Each place was a piece of me, a reminder that I'd built a life once and could do it again. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was a voicemail from Michael. His voice was softer now, less frantic. "Mom, I messed up. I should have stood up for you. Please, let's talk." I saved the message, a small step towards something I wasn't ready to name. Redemption, maybe, or just a chance to be heard. A week had passed since I'd left Michael's house, and I was starting to feel like myself again. Carol's apartment was a safe haven, a place where I could think without the constant weight of Laura's disapproval or Michael's indifference. I'd taken to walking the city every morning, rediscovering streets I'd forgotten, finding small joys in a cup of coffee or a stranger's smile. But the letter I'd written sat on Carol's kitchen table, a reminder that I couldn't avoid my family forever. I'd have to face them, to decide what justice looked like, what redemption meant. I was at the diner one morning when my phone rang. It was Emma, and this time I answered. Her voice was small, trembling. "Grandma, I miss you. I'm so sorry for what happened." I wanted to say something, but I was scared. I could hear the tears in her voice, and my heart softened. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said, my voice gentler than I'd expected. "I'm not mad at you." We talked for a while, and she told me how tense things were at home. The frozen account had caused chaos, bills unpaid, groceries running low. I felt a twinge of guilt, but I pushed it down. They needed to learn, didn't they? Emma asked if she could see me, and I agreed to meet her at the park. When I saw her, my heart ached. She looked so young, her eyes red from crying. We sat on a bench, and she poured out her heart, how she'd felt trapped between her parents, how she hated how they treated me. "I love you, Grandma," she said, and I pulled her into a hug. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe not all was lost. Maybe there was a way to rebuild, starting with her. I went back to Carol's and reread the letter. It was raw, angry, but it was true. I decided to send it, but not to Michael or Laura, to Emma. She deserved to know how I felt, to understand why I'd done what I did. I mailed it that afternoon, along with a note telling her I loved her and wanted to talk more. It felt like a step, small but significant. I wasn't ready to face Michael or Laura, but Emma was a start, a way to keep the door open. That night, Carol and I talked about the future. She suggested I look for a job, something to give me purpose. I hadn't worked since moving in with Michael, but the idea excited me. I'd always loved helping people, whether it was serving coffee at the diner or listening to a friend's troubles. Maybe I could volunteer at the library, or even start writing those stories I used to tell Michael. The thought made me smile, a real smile, not the forced one I'd worn for years. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was Michael. I didn't answer, but I listened to his voicemail. "Mom, I'm coming to the city tomorrow. I need to see you. Please." His voice was different now, broken in a way I hadn't heard before. I didn't know if I was ready, but I knew I couldn't keep running. I'd frozen their account to make them feel my pain, and maybe they had. Now it was time to decide what came next, punishment or forgiveness, or maybe something in between. The morning Michael was due to arrive, I woke with a knot in my stomach. I hadn't seen him since that night at the bus stop, and I wasn't sure what I'd say. Carol made me breakfast, her quiet support a lifeline. "You don't have to forgive him today," she said. "Just hear him out. You deserve that much." I nodded, grateful for her wisdom. I chose to meet Michael at the park, the same one where I'd seen Emma. It felt right. A place tied to better memories. A place where we could talk without the weight of his house pressing down on us. He was there when I arrived, sitting on a bench, his hands clasped tightly. He looked older, tired, the lines on his face deeper than I remembered. When he saw me, he stood, his eyes searching mine. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking. I didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. He took a step closer, then stopped, as if afraid I'd bolt. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I should have stopped her. I should have stood up for you." The words were what I'd wanted to hear, but they didn't erase the pain. Not yet. We sat, and he told me everything: how Laura's pressure had worn him down, how he'd been too weak to fight her, how he'd let his fear of conflict silence him. He didn't make excuses, and for that, I was grateful. I told him about the bus stop, the rain, the feeling of being erased. I told him about the account, why I'd frozen it, how it was the only way I could make them see me. He listened, his head bowed, tears in his eyes. "I didn't know how much we'd hurt you," he said. I swear, I didn't know. I wanted to believe him, but trust was a fragile thing, and mine was shattered. I told him about the letter I'd sent to Emma, how I needed time to heal. He nodded, understanding more than I expected. "What can I do?" he asked. I didn't have an answer, not a complete one. "Be my son again," I said finally. "Not Laura's husband, not the kid's dad, just my son." He promised to try, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of the boy I'd raised. We talked for hours, the park emptying around us. He told me Laura was angry but starting to see her part in this. The kids were devastated, especially Emma, who'd been blaming herself. I told him I'd unfreeze the account, but not yet. I needed them to understand that actions had consequences, that love wasn't a one-way street. He agreed, and when we parted, he hugged me, a real hug, not the perfunctory ones I'd gotten in recent years. Back at Carol's, I felt lighter, not healed but hopeful. I'd started to reclaim myself, to see a future where I wasn't defined by my family's mistakes. I'd volunteer at the library, maybe write those stories, build a life that was mine. Michael and I would rebuild, slowly, and maybe Laura would come around, or maybe she wouldn't. Either way, I'd be okay. I'd survive the rain, and I'd survive this. As I sat on Carol's balcony that night, the city lights sparkling below, I felt a quiet strength. I was Evelyn, and I was enough.